The sun was a dying ember on the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the endless savanna. The air, usually thick with the hum of insects and the calls of birds, was suffocatingly still. It was the quiet that came before a storm, the silence that followed a death. For Aki, the Homo habilis father, this silence was louder than any roar. It was the sound of a world holding its breath, a world on the brink of being devoured. Their home, a shallow, sheltered overhang carved into a low cliff face, smelled of damp earth and the smoky residue of last night's fire. But tonight that familiar scent was overpowered by the stench of something alien and brutal. The scent of the Hulan, a tribe from the far southern plains, who were rumored to have skin as dark as the night and hearts as empty as the desert. They were not just rivals. They were a force of nature, a plague that swept away all life in their path. Aki's hands, calloused from years of scraping hides and shaping stones, trembled as he gripped a heavy club. He had seen what the Hulan did. They didn't just chase away. They annihilated. Their purpose wasn't to take territory or food. Their purpose was to erase. The screams of the last tribe they encountered, the whispers of which had traveled on the wind for days, still haunted his waking hours. They had left nothing behind but dust and shattered bones. His mate, the female Emi, held their small son, Kale, tightly against her chest. Kale's eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, were a perfect replica of his father's, filled with a nascent fear that Aki couldn't bear to see. Emi's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her rhythmic, panicked breathing a sharp, painful counterpoint to the impending doom. "They are close," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Aki didn't need to be told. The ground rumbled, a low, persistent tremor that spoke of heavy feet and many bodies. He could hear the guttural cries now, a war chant that promised only blood. The tribe's alpha, a wizened old male named Koro, emerged from the back of the cave, his face a mask of grim determination. His hands were empty. They had no weapons. They had no way to fight back. All they had was a choice, to run or to die. "We go north," Koro grunted, his gaze fixed on Aki. "The old path, through the high thorns. They will not follow us there." Aki nodded, his mind a whirlwind of frantic calculations. The path was treacherous, a narrow pass choked with vicious, spiky vegetation. It was a route meant for desperate animals, not for a clan carrying their young. He looked at Kale, then at the terrified faces of the other children. The high thorns would protect them, but would they survive the journey? "We must leave now," Koro urged, the rumble outside growing into a roar. Before they find the entrance. The air filled with the stench of the Hulan. It was a smell of stale meat, sweat, and something else. A bitter, almost sulfurous odor that smelled of pure malevolence. Aki's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the proximity of his enemies in the very air he breathed. They were no longer just a distant threat. They were a presence, a suffocating force pressing in on all sides. As the first shadow fell across the cave entrance, Aki knew they had to run. But in his mind, the question was not how to escape, but who to sacrifice. For a father, there was no choice. The question was, what would he do when running was no longer enough? The world outside the cave was a fever dream of fading light and burgeoning violence. The Hulan tribe, a tide of dark, hulking figures, swept across the savanna with a chilling efficiency. Their crude spears, tipped with sharpened stone, glinted in the last rays of sun. Their leader, a monstrous brute with a massive chest and a face contorted into a permanent scowl, let out a thunderous cry that seemed to shake the very rocks. Aki led the way, his heart a frantic drumbeat in his chest. Emi was right behind him, her every step a careful balance of speed and caution, her arms a cradle for their son. The scent of the Hulan was so strong now that it stung his nostrils, a sour, acrid odor of unwashed bodies and primitive rage. The clan moved like phantoms through the deepening twilight, a desperate, silent chain of life. The high thorns loomed before them, a twisted, impenetrable wall of gnarled branches and razor-sharp spines. The air here was different, cooler and thick with the smell of broken twigs and the earthy scent of hidden creatures. It was a place of refuge, a natural fortress, but it was also a labyrinth of pain. As they slipped through the narrow entrance, the thorns tore at their clothes and scratched at their skin. A young female stumbled, a gasp of pain escaping her lips as a thorn pierced her thigh. She was quickly helped up by the others, but the delay was enough. A single triumphant howl echoed behind them. "They've been seen." Aki's instincts screamed at him to go faster, to abandon the slow and the weak, but his heart refused. This was his family, his clan. He wouldn't leave them to be slaughtered. He pushed forward, his own body a shield against the punishing thorns, clearing a path with his hands and feet. The thorns raked his arms and legs, drawing thin lines of blood that glowed a dark red in the gloom. He didn't feel the pain. All he felt was the burning urgency to get his son to safety. The cries of the Hulan grew closer, their shouts a savage chorus of impending doom. He could hear the snapping of branches, the grunting of their warriors. They were closer than he had ever imagined. They were like a pack of hunting hyenas, relentless and without mercy. Achi's mind raced, searching for an escape. The path was too narrow, too slow. Suddenly, a sound, a piercing shriek from the back of their group. It was the old female Zira. She had fallen. Her leg, twisted at a grotesque angle, was caught in the thorns. She cried out again, a sound of both pain and terror, as the first of the Hulan warriors burst into view, a dark shape in the fading light. Karo, the alpha, did not hesitate. He moved back, pushing the other members of the clan past Zira. His gaze met Aki's, a silent message passing between them. "Go. Now, protect the young." Koro stood there, a small, defiant figure, a single pebble against a tidal wave of brutality. The Hulan warrior let out a roar of triumph, his spear raised high. "Go!" Koro screamed, his voice raw with fury and sacrifice. Aki didn't look back. The image of the old alpha, standing alone, was burned into his memory. He pulled Annie and Kale along, pushing them deeper into the thorny labyrinth. The last thing he heard was the dull, wet sound of a spear finding its target, followed by a final, guttural cry that was abruptly cut short. Koro was gone. The path was stained with blood, and Aki knew, with a horrifying certainty, that this was just the beginning of the sacrifices. The thorny labyrinth was a graveyard of shadows and the rustling whispers of the night. The scent of Zira and Koro's spilled blood was a bitter perfume on the wind, a chilling reminder of the price of their escape. Aki's jaw was locked, his eyes wide, his entire being focused on one thing: moving forward. His arms were a roadmap of red streaks from the thorns, but the physical pain was a distant echo compared to the gnawing agony in his soul. They moved for what felt like an eternity, the moon a sliver of silver light peeking through the canopy of branches. The Hulan's shouts had faded, but the silence that replaced them was no comfort. It was a hunter's silence, a silent stalk. Aki knew they hadn't given up. They were circling, their primitive minds calculating, their savage instincts a powerful force that would not be denied. The clan found a temporary refuge in a small, rocky clearing. The air was cool here, smelling of mineral dust and dry leaves. They huddled together, a trembling mass of exhausted bodies and shattered nerves. Kale, their son, was asleep now, his small head resting on Aki's lap. Aki stroked his son's hair, his fingers gentle. It was in this moment, in this fragile quiet, that the true weight of his decision settled upon him. He looked at Amy, her face pale in the moonlight. "We cannot stop," he whispered, his voice rough. "They will find us." Amy's eyes, heavy with sorrow, met his. "What more can we lose, Aki? The question was a spear through his heart. They had already lost Koro, the wise alpha. They had lost Zira, the gentle mother. He looked at the other members of the clan. A few young males, a handful of females, and the terrified children. Their numbers were dwindling, their resolve cracking under the relentless pressure. A low growl rumbled from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't a Hulan. This was something bigger, something with teeth, a predator. A pack of hyanodons, their silhouettes like grotesque, misshapen dogs, emerged from the brush. Their eyes, a pale, sinister yellow, glowed in the dark. The stench of their rank breath, a mix of carrion and death, filled the air. Panic surged through the group. The hyanodons were not as fast as the Hulan, but they were cunning and merciless. They would pick off the weakest, one by one. The clan scrambled to their feet, their panicked whispers filling the night. The hyanodons began to circle, their low growls a predatory symphony. Aki's mind, honed by a lifetime of survival, saw the opportunity. The hyanodons were a threat, but they could also be a shield. They were a diversion. He looked at the trail they had just taken. The Hulan were likely still following their scent. If he could draw the hyanodons back, a horrifying, brutal thought took root in his mind. He picked up a large rock, its weight a familiar comfort in his hands. He looked at the other men, their faces a mix of terror and despair. He grunted, a single, sharp word. Follow. He moved to the edge of the clearing, and with a primal roar, he hurled the rock directly at the largest hyanodon. The beast yelped in surprise and anger. Aki took off, not deeper into the thorns, but back the way they had come. He could hear the pounding feet of the hyanodons behind him, their bloodthirsty snarls a promise of a painful end. He was a piece of meat, a lure. He ran, not toward escape, but toward the Hulan. He was leading the wolves to the other wolves. He knew what would happen. A brutal collision of two predators, a war of claws and spears. He didn't care. As long as he got his clan to safety, he was willing to become a ghost, a sacrifice. The first scent of the Hulan was in the air, a familiar, hated stench. And with it, a newfound chilling determination. He was a father, and to save his family, he was willing to send them to their death. The air thickened with a foul, new stench, the coppery smell of freshly spilled blood mingling with the musky odor of the hyanodons. Aki's heart hammered against his ribs as he sprinted through the darkness. The sounds of his pursuers, a terrifying mix of snarling beasts and the thunderous footsteps of the Hulan. He was a single desperate point of light in a universe of darkness, leading a parade of death right to the doorstep of a war. He plunged through a thicket of dry brush, the sharp leaves and branches whipping at his face. The screams of a Hulan warrior pierced the night, a sound of agony and shock, followed by the wet, crunching sounds of bone breaking and flesh tearing. The hyanodons had found their new prey. A roar of fury and confusion erupted from the Hulan. The hunter had become the hunted. Aki didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached with a deep throbbing pain. He found the clan huddled in a small, shallow crevice between two large boulders. Emmy's face was a mask of relief and fear. She rushed to him, her hands checking him for wounds, her eyes searching his for a sign that he was still whole. Aki ... "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling. He said nothing, his gaze fixed on the darkness from which he had just emerged. The sounds of the battle were a brutal symphony in the distance. The Hulan, more accustomed to fighting rivals than savage, non-human beasts, were caught off guard. He had bought them time. He had traded blood for breath, a pact with the devil. But he knew this peace was fleeting. The Hulan, in their blind rage, would regroup, and they would remember. "We must go now," he said, his voice a low growl, "before they come for us again." The clan moved, their pace a renewed, panicked shuffle. They were a shattered reflection of their former selves. The children, their faces streaked with tears and dirt, were no longer crying. They were silent, their fear, a silent, palpable thing that weighed on the very air around them. The journey was a blur of fear and exhaustion. The moon climbed high, then began its slow descent toward the horizon. The eastern sky was a faint, bruised purple, promising a dawn of unknown horrors. They came to a great, flat expanse of land, a wide-open plain that smelled of dry grass and the promise of nothing. There was nowhere to hide here, nowhere to run. "We cannot cross," a young male named Taro whimpered, his eyes wide with fear. "They will see us." Aki looked at the vast, featureless expanse. Taro was right. They were too slow, too exposed. The Hulan would see them from miles away and would run them down like prey. He looked at Eni and Kale, their faces drawn with exhaustion. He knew what he had to do. The answer was a horrifying, primal truth that had been lurking in the back of his mind since he had first seen the Hulan. To save his clan, he had to change the rules of the game. "We will not cross," Aki said, his voice low and firm. He looked at the men, their faces a mix of terror and despair. "We will turn around." A collective gasp went through the group. To go back was to walk into the jaws of death, but Aki's gaze was hard, resolute. "We will go back. We will find their camp. And we will strike first." A cold silence fell over them. A few of the men looked away, their faces etched with a deep-seated fear. To attack was madness. It was to become a monster. Aki looked at his son sleeping peacefully in Emi's arms. He knew there was no turning back. He had made a new deal with the darkness, and this time he was ready to pay in blood. The world now was one of heightened senses. The distant growl of a lone predator, the rustle of dry grass underfoot, the scent of a nearby carcass, a morbid promise of a gruesome meal. This was the world of the hunter, the world of the killer. Aki felt a cold, alien calm settle over him. He was no longer a father running for his life. He was an instrument of survival. He was a ghost, a shadow moving with a grim purpose. He led the remaining males of the clan Taro and a silent, hulking youth named Orin back the way they came. Emi and the others were hidden in a small, dry gully, their faces pale with fear, but their eyes filled with a desperate trust. The stench of the Hulan was now overpowering, a suffocating cloud that hung in the air, a reminder of their proximity. They moved toward a jagged ridge of rock that overlooked the main valley. The moon, a bright disk in the ink-black sky, cast long, distorted shadows. From this vantage point, Aki could see the Hulan camp below. A ring of small, low fires flickered, the flames casting an eerie orange glow on the dark forms of the sleeping warriors. The stench was almost unbearable now, a mix of cooking meat, sweat, and the faint coppery tang of their earlier victory. "They sleep," Taro whispered, his voice trembling. Aki nodded, his mind a flurry of calculation. He counted the number of warriors, the locations of the guards. They were lazy, arrogant in their power. They believed they had scared off all resistance. They were not expecting a ghost to return. Aki picked up a jagged piece of flint, its edges razor-sharp. He looked at Taro and Orin, their eyes wide with terror and a hesitant sense of awe. "We will not fight them all," he grunted, his voice a low, primal rasp. "We will not face them. We will take their leader." He pointed to a large, heavily built form sleeping near the center fire. It was the Alpha, the monster who had brought this death to their land. To kill him would not end the Hulan, but it would shatter their purpose, their cohesion. It would turn a unified, relentless force into a panicked, confused mob. Orin looked at the ground, his body trembling. "Aki, ... We can't. It's too ... It is a life for a life." Aki cut in, his voice hard. "They're a leader for our children. You can stand here and die, or you can live. You have a choice." He didn't wait for an answer. He began his descent, a silent, deadly shadow gliding down the rocks. The dry grass crunched under his feet, but the sound was masked by the whispering wind. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the hulan. The scent of them filled his lungs. He was in their midst, a ghost walking among the living. He crept closer to the sleeping alpha. The man's chest rose and fell with a heavy, oblivious rhythm. Aki raised the sharp flint. His heart, which had been a frantic drumbeat for days, was now a cold, slow hammer in his chest. He would not hesitate. He would not feel pity. He would become what was necessary. The world was not a place for mercy. It was a place for survival. The flint, owned by his own hands, was ready to find its mark. He was not a father. He was not a man. He was a tool of vengeance, a weapon forged in the fires of love and desperation. He was an assassin, and his target was sleeping soundly, unaware of the horror that was about to be unleashed. The flint, a cold and unforgiving extension of his will, descended in a swift, brutal arc. There was a sickening, wet sound, a brief, muffled gurgle, and then silence. The hulking form of the hulan leader went limp, a sudden lifeless weight on the cold ground. Aki didn't linger. He moved on, a ghost in the dark, the scent of blood a hot, dizzying cloud around him. He crept away, his heart a hammer of cold satisfaction. The monster was dead. A sudden, sharp cry erupted from the camp. A hulan warrior, awakening for his watch, had discovered the lifeless body of his leader. The quiet of the night was shattered by a cacophony of panicked shouts and guttural roars. Fires were hastily stoked, their light illuminating a scene of utter chaos. The hulan were not a unified force anymore. They were a panicked, leaderless mob, a herd without a shepherd. Aki, Taro, and Oren scrambled back up the rocky ridge, their bodies aching, their minds reeling. From their vantage point, they watched the scene below. Hulan warriors began to argue, to shove each other. The brutal, unifying force that had brought them here was gone, replaced by infighting and confusion. A fight broke out over a piece of meat. Soon, the entire camp was a whirlwind of rage. Their fury turned inward upon themselves. They're fighting each other. Taro whispered in disbelief, his eyes wide. Aki nodded, his jaw tight. Their strength was in their leader. Without him, they are nothing. The three men moved back to the gully where the rest of the clan waited. Emmy ran to him, her eyes searching his face. She saw the blood on his hands, the grim purpose in his eyes. She didn't ask. She simply wrapped her arms around him, a silent understanding passing between them. He was a killer, a savage, but he had died to save them. The clan moved on, their backs to the chaos they had created. The dawn was breaking now, a soft, golden light painting the world in hues of orange and pink. The sounds of the fighting hulan faded into the distance, a distant memory of a nightmare they had barely survived. They walked for days, their journey a blur of exhaustion and quiet relief. The land began to change, the dry, unforgiving savanna giving way to a new, unfamiliar terrain. The air was moist, smelling of fresh water and lush greenery. A great river, its surface a mirror of the sky, cut through a forest of trees that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sounds were different here, too. The chirping of exotic birds, the lazy splash of water, the rustle of leaves in a soft, gentle breeze. They had reached a new home, a new world, purchased with the life of a monster. Aki looked down at his son, Kale, who was walking now, his small hand clasped in his father's. The boy's eyes were not filled with fear, but with a nascent curiosity, a wonder at the strange new world. Aki knew that the shadows of their past would never truly leave them. The memory of the hulan, of Koro's sacrifice, of the blood on his hands, would remain a part of him forever. But as he stood on the bank of the great river, the sun warming his face, he realized something else. He was a father, a protector, a savior. To be a human in this dark, savage world was to make impossible choices. He had made his, and he had saved his blood. As the clan began to build their new home, he looked at the dense forest and wondered what other secrets, what other terrors lay hidden within. The past was behind them, but the future was a dark, unwritten page.